Welcome to Birds Spray Sports, where we weekly cover Ravens and Orioles news. We're your hosts, TJ and Jared. And in this video, we're just going to be doing, a recap of the press conference today that featured Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti and GM Eric DeCosta. Just a press conference of which, they both, especially Bisciotti, was very, very honest and blunt, me and you were talking, and like how you said, in our individual conversation, a meeting that was very much needed to sort of get an inside view of the Ravens. We were so used to, the word salads and just the beating around the bush by Harbaugh and EDC in the past years. And, it was very hard to gauge what was really going on behind the scenes and, how things were perceived within the building, and in today's, press conference, we sort of got, a better view of that. And, just to start, from my opinions, I really enjoyed seeing it. I didn't know that Bisciotti kind of stepped away from not really the organization in terms of like, leaving or whatnot, but like just taking a back seat in terms of, always being, front facing, always, being in person, when it comes to the Ravens. And so, just listening to that and kind of hearing his opinions about the team and about Harbaugh and, the state of the Ravens from a, outside point of view, it was very interesting. It was like he was also a fan. It was like he was also one of us on Twitter, seeing the disappointing performances, especially the offensive line, which he pointed out, wasn't, good this season. And, he said that right with EDC right next to him. I think that was very important for him to hear because, he was, really a main reasoning of why that happened that way. His construction of the O line wasn't acceptable for this season. It resulted in Lamar getting sacked, seven times in one game and four times, I think five times in another game. So in total, that's 12 sacks in two games. It's unacceptable. So it was good to see the owner, say out of his mouth that the offensive line play was not good, and he also talked about, EDC, how, he views him as a good, GM, and he has had, misses, and he said, a lot of good swings, but, you know, I feel like just having your boss right next to you and, kind of really facing the music, facing the flames and hearing him give his honest evaluation of, one of your byproducts, I think was a good thing, to hear, not only for him, but for the fans. And, another thing that, I really thought was interesting and really what I appreciated was, kind of his detailing of, what transpired with the Harbaugh firing. You know, obviously it was over the phone, like how reports came out, but it was very emotional, as we would expect. He sort of said Harbaugh was consoling him more than the other way around. And I thought that was very interesting because he probably knew for a while that things were getting stale and it was time to move on. And he really thought about it. He talked to veteran players. He talked to Lamar, who mentioned how there was reports saying how he has a problem with Monken and then he has a problem with Harbs, and that really wasn't the case. But he did believe that change was to be made. And you know I really think that that's important because for the longest time, me and you have been believing this as well. It seemed like the Ravens were straying where they were going to choose Harbaugh over Lamar. And, they were going to continue with having the same coaching staff and, you know, maybe even move on or maybe make Lamar move on. But in this case, we chose Lamar over Harbaugh. And, I'm very happy with that. Just hearing that Lamar's, voice is valued and been a great vocal point, in decisions. It was great and refreshing to hear, and obviously there was some, jokes in there, like, they were asking him, if Tyler Luke make the field goal, would Harb stay? He's like for a week. You thought that was funny. I thought that was funny too. He was very, blunt with that answer. But, overall, I thought it was a very honest and, really well done press conference. And, I thought the questions were just also pretty good questions as well. People were just letting them rip, wasn't really things held back and just very good honest answers from Bishotti. I really like his transparency. So, we'll delve more into that. But, I want to, pass the ball to you. What did you think about, the press conference and what went down?
I was surprised of how long it went on. I mean, I was in the middle of watching the show, and then I saw it was like 1:55. I was like, oh man, I gotta tune in. That's right. So I threw it up on my TV, and then the next thing I know, it's 3 o'clock, and I'm like, oh man, I can't believe it. Like that was a long press conference. But Steve goes into some tangents in this press conference. He really delves into his explanations of things. And I can really appreciate that for certain answers as well. Because I explained this to you in our messages that for like these last few seasons we haven't gotten answers. Especially after the end of the season. The way these seasons have ended. It's not like they've ended like, oh, we're trash, whatever. Like we missed the playoffs because we went 7-10, or we had a lot of injuries and we missed the playoffs. Like no, like we lost in the AFC Championship game at home, and then we lost a heartbreaker in the divisional round, versus Buffalo. And it felt like after the season ended, there was radio silence until like the draft, and it's like, well, what are you changing exactly? Like to be able to make sure that this isn't the same, and I think that silence was louder than any words they could have, spoken. And today, I was appreciative of, the truthfulness, the unfilteredness as well. That they really went on. It's mainly Steve. I was disappointed in EDC's answers today. I wasn't really a fan of um, his responses to certain questions. Um, the way he made it seem with the offensive line is that they were consistent but inconsistent, and I'm like, no, you can't be both. You're not. In fact, you actually can. You're consistently inconsistent, I should say. I think he undermines or really doesn't see much of an issue with this offensive line at all, and you know. There's part of me that wishes Steve got rid of both. you know, um, in all seriousness, because I heard that Easy was crying in his, office trying to get him John Harbaugh to stay, and I'm like, you probably weren't crying when Lamar got hurt 1,000 times this year, because of your shit construction of the offensive line, so try to go cheap. So, I don't want to delve too deep into that, but look, I'm glad Steve Bisciotti pretty much said pretty much right next to him, like, this team wasn't well coached. And they didn't. These coaches didn't get these players to where they needed to be, and we had a lot of underperforming players this year. We had a lot of players underperform this year.
Yeah.
I mean, like a lot. It wasn't just a few guys. Like in the seasons that we've been really good, we had like one or two guys, that we kind of maybe expected more of that didn't perform. But this year it was a shit ton of guys. It was Tyler Linderbaum. It was Roger Rosengarten. It was Bateman. It was Likely. It was Andrews. It was you know, DeAndre Hopkins, it was Vercon Smith, Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins at points. Where the hell was Malachi Starks all season? Like we're t almost talking about the whole team at this point. I mean, Justice Hill as well. Obviously he got hurt at the end of the season, but he was a very utilized piece the last season in 2024 on screens, on wheel routes, on pass blocking, but all that seemed to just go to shit. In this season, Falele, to me, put on some pretty.
Worse.
I don't think he put on decent tape last year, but he seemed to improve a little bit more towards the end of the season. Maybe gelling with that offensive line better. But then they took a 10,000 step backwards, and it felt like the whole entire offensive line was terrible. I thought there was plenty of points where Ronnie Stanley was getting put in his ass, and he's considered our best lineman, and he also had that penalty versus in Pittsburgh, that that sent us to a third and long or whatever. So it's stuff like that happens that is frustrating, And Voorhees was look, if it wasn't for Falele, Voorhees would be getting the Falele treatment. I'll tell you that. So if he's on the left guard next year, um, then he'll be the next Falele. I'll bet you that. Linderbaum in a contract year was disappointing. Isaiah Likely in a contract year was disappointing. Rashad Bateman in an extension year was disappointing. Like this is just we had too many guys underperformed this year. And, people want to go ahead and say, Lamar's washed and Lamar's out of his prime, but what the fuck is he supposed to do with thousand guys on the team underperforming? Like, and he's getting hurt. Like, I don't understand what he's supposed to do. So, shout out to Steve for calling all this stuff out. Because we deserve this honesty, from the front office for once. I'm tired of these word salads that, oh, we're gonna come back with a vengeance, or we're gonna come back stronger, or we're gonna do this, or we're gonna do that. Like, and then they don't do that shit. Like, no, this is to me needs to light a fire under Eric DeCosta's ass because this is him now. The new staff that they're going to bring in or whatever, they're going to get more leniency, in my opinion. Because if Eric DeCosta doesn't give the new staff, new coaching staff, the right guys, you know, he's going to be next. In all seriousness, like we're going to be coming here next year saying how Eric DeCosta got fired. If we don't even make the playoffs next year, I can guarantee you he's gone. So and Bisciotti made it very clear that he doesn't have much longer of owning the Baltimore Ravens. He gave a time frame to 10 to 15 years. Well, I mean, the question was posed 10 to 15 years, but he mentioned he doesn't want to be doing this till he's 80, and he's 65 right now. So 15 years is probably out of the question. But I'll just tell you, like, it is very clear that Steve Bisciotti wants to win, but how much does Eric DeCosta want to win? Like the beating around the bush with certain questions was pissing me off with him, but the very brutal honesty with Steve Bisciotti was we needed that. That was refreshing. That was just so nice to hear because, like I said, I mean, like even just me and you this season, like you spent a shit ton of money to get to the Lions game just for the defense to give up the two longest drive in the freaking stadium history, and them to look absolutely god awful all game, and get Lamar sacked 7 times. Like, how is that a good product to watch? Like, that's 2 straight seasons where our defense has been historically bad, to start off the season. We fixed it quicker, but then they shit the bed at the end of the year again, like when we needed them the most. So I mean, what is that about? I'll just tell you, I'm it's just as happy as Orr getting fired, it's just with Harbaugh getting fired, because look, I respect Orr, and I loved him as a player, but God, was he the worst offensive defensive coordinator we've had probably in Ravens history. I mean, like, I think I'd rather watch a Marty Morningway freaking led offense than a Zach Orr defense. And I'd really, want to. I'd really rather watch that. In fact, I'd like to see what a Marty Morningway or the one Bears coach. Who was that one Bears coach that we hired as our offensive coordinator? It was like that.
Tressman.
Yeah,
Mark.
Mark Trestman. I want to see a Mark Trestman offense go against a Zach Orr defense. It's like a stoppable force meets a movable object, So it's like, literally, but just watch this playoff game last on Monday with the Steelers. I'm going off on my own tangent here, but you know, the Steelers in 3 weeks, excluding the Ravens game, put up 12 points. They didn't score one touchdown versus the Browns. They didn't score one touchdown versus the Texans. They put up 26, should have been 27 points in between those two stretches versus the Ravens defense.
It's unacceptable.
26. Aaron Rodgers looked like 2020 Aaron Rodgers against us. And that right there would have been enough for me. If I was on the fence about firing Harbaugh, that would have been enough for me right there. And I know that's not Harbaugh, but that's his staff. And, I don't know, like his staff, was full of guys like George Warhop and Dr. Butt, I mean, a Dr. Rush, so I don't know why I said Dr. Butt, but and you can't fucking pass play. I ain't named Dr. Rush and you can't rush the passer correctly. Wade go ahead and get traded to the freaking Chargers, and he has like 8 sacks this year or something like that. He had a sack fumble versus the Patriots on Saturday or Sunday, whatever it was. I'm like what is that about? So like, is Oweh actually good? He's just not good with us. Like I don't know what that's. I would imagine he stays with the Chargers now, but maybe he follows Minter wherever he goes. But anyways, to get back on track, yeah, I mean, I think they got the breaking news that Tomlin got fired or Tomlin quit or whatever, or stepped down or whatever in the middle of the thing, and I'm glad that he's not a candidate.
Yeah. And So you made some very good points there. And to one of them, talking about EDC, he is under a lot of pressure this offseason. One thing that was mentioned was how important it was to, get Lamar to a contract extension. And EDC himself mentioned how that would free up a lot of cap space and, make them kind of act uncharacteristic in terms of acquiring big ticket free agents. But he mentioned how they've usually been reserved in free agency and whatnot. And getting that done would create more space to resign our own players like Linderbaum, likely, maybe give an extension to Zay Flowers. But, only time will tell if that can happen. That depends on Lamar as well. And Bashadi made it clear that, to Lamar that, it needs to get done, and they kind of had some talks about that too. It seemed like it's been going in a positive direction, but we'll have to see. But one thing that kind of you mentioned George Warhop, and I just remember something from the press conference. One thing that made me kind of happy is I think it was Bashadi mentioned how the new coach that's coming in, he's going to bring in his own guys. He's going to bring in his own O-line coach, own secondary coach, or just choose new people. And that kind of made me happy that okay, maybe Warhop is done. Kind of like how with Orr and Munkin, they weren't officially fired, but it's sort of known that they're going to be let go. They're not going to be a part of this new head coaching staff, and it made me kind of happy that hopefully Warhop and hopefully maybe Pagano might be gone too. So in terms of our like just subtype coaching, it might just be a clean slate. And I'm kind of looking forward to that. I'm hoping that they don't go with a candidate that's already had like intimate knowledge of the Ravens organization, like how Bashadi was talking about. I just want it to be like a new guy, like just a refreshment of a head coach. I feel like that's the way to go. I don't know if they're thinking, Cliff Kingsbury. I don't know if they're thinking Kubiak. I don't know if they're thinking Sala, Flores. The popular, the most popular candidates right now among the fans seem to be, Flores or Kubiak, maybe
Danielson.
Salah, McDaniels too. I'm not big on McDaniels as a head coach. Maybe an offensive coordinator, but I've seen other teams like the Eagles and trying to get him as well. So it's going to be very, very, uh, you know, challenging, to get the guys that we really want. But you know, all of our head coaches have won the Super Bowl. So hopefully this next one can do it. They
I don't
made
think
it.
all,
Huh?
I think the first one didn't.
Oh no, no. I mean,
Ted,
the last two I meant to say,
uh,
Billick and Harbaugh.
what was his name? Ted Archib
Mark
something.
Sherrod, Mark
Yeah,
Sherrod.
yeah.
Yeah, Billick and Harbaugh win the Super Bowl. So hopefully, our next one can win one as well. I believe he will. We definitely have the roster to do so, and it's been embarrassing how we couldn't get the job done, and
Yeah, I
that's
mean, yeah, our last two coaches have inherited
yeah,
good teams,
good
that
team.
ultimately
Yeah,
won the Super Bowl, so that's, I mean, whoever coaches the team next is inheriting a pretty good team again, so
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, I think it just shows how well run the Ravens have been over the past 30 years, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and similar to, how you mentioned with Tomlin, the Steelers have only had three head coaches in their entire existence. And I think this next one will be the fourth, so just two organizations that are very consistent, very, well run, very class organizations when it comes to, the way they're coached and the way they're ran. And, hopefully we can get that out of our next one. But I'm just really hoping that, they can get the best out of Lamar. And is this breaking news there too?
No, I didn't. I wanted to see that thing you're talking about, three head coaches, but I'm
Oh,
confused because I just saw it said three, and then now it says they've had 16.
16?
But I
Wow,
think it says they've had three since
96.
1969.
Oh, it's doing the Colts. It's including the Colts, it must be. Oh, okay.
So they've only had three coaches. The
The
Steelers.
Ravens.
Oh, the Steelers. The Steelers
Oh,
have
the
had three.
Steelers. Oh, okay,
The
okay.
Steelers have only had three coaches since 69. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, again, it's just it goes to show the, just the organization, of the class of each team, and they do a good job of keeping coaches and keeping good teams. But I'm just hoping that this next coach can get the best out of Lamar, can get the best out of Derrick Henry. We have, kind of an aging roster, so I won't say our Super Bowl window is closing, but with each year that we miss out or each year that we shoot ourselves in the foot and lose, it is kind of closing, but we got to get it done. It has to be done, and it kind of has to be done next year or the year after, because this is a playoff ready team. This is a Super Bowl ready team. This isn't no rebuilding stage or, oh, we need one more piece. I mean, we could use a wide receiver one, and, hopefully that comes in the likes of AJ Brown or George Pickens. That's actually something I want to see from the new head coach we get is aggressiveness, or I mean, that's not really a head coach's job, but EDC aggressiveness when it comes to free agency, but you know, only time will tell. But I want to see that, and we need to make the pass rush better too.
I want to see a coach that can come in and implement three receiver sets.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
can we implement a three receivers on the field? Like where everyone can be a threat. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. When we do that, it's only like on a Hail Mary or something.
Yeah, we're so caught up into like these three tight end sets. We do it with the tight ends, but not the wide receivers, and I get it. That's a part of our run game philosophy, but it would be nice to see us actually stretch out the field.
Yeah.
So, hopefully we can get that because I mean, I feel like guys like Zay Bateman can do it, if we choose to keep him. But
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to talk about that a little bit. I mean, one good year, like four bad years, like, and we had in a few of them been injury riddled. Like, I don't know what the fuck that extension was, man. Like, the Ravens extend people on some weird shit, man. Sometimes.
I mean, I feel like at the time it was a good extension. I just don't know what happened this year. Like, it was a combination of us not using him, and at the same time, it was a combination of him like not being reliable for us to go to. Like
I
guys like
mean, but I
Hop
mean, like,
became more reliable than him.
even in his best year, like, there's two instances in big moments where he's had miscommunication with Lamar.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's just not. And I understand it's two out of maybe like 800 snaps, but like those two are huge. We need to understand it, and it was versus teams and in games where the margin of error was very slim.
Yeah.
So it's like, what did Bateman do after that one catch for the touchdown in Buffalo?
I mean, it
I mean,
wasn't
yeah, okay, great, yeah, he got a touchdown, yeah, great, but like, not saying it's like bad or anything, but like, I mean, like, what did he do after that?
Yeah, we could have definitely used the AJ Brown or Pickens in that game, because we didn't have Zay.
Yeah,
Rely on guys like, Steven Sims and Anthony Miller and Tylen Wallace, who, isn't really a factor anymore now. So,
and
that's
that's
one
a
thing
frustrating thing
I
for
want to
me
see.
to even like think about because it's like if Devontae Walker was on the field, he could have stretched the field for us and had like the middle of the field open for us,
Yeah.
or the short game open for us for guys like Justice Hill and Isaiah Likely and whatnot. But no, like I don't even know if he was active that game.
Yeah, and hopefully there's none of that no more to it. This new head coach, just having, certain players being active or certain players not playing as much because they don't add value to special teams. Like all of that was weird last year. It took away from us having Keaton Mitchell, be more prominent at the beginning of the year and in parts of 2024. I mean, I know they were kind of easing him back in from the injury, but hopefully it's just none of that, weird roster machinations moving forward. We want to see guys who add to the field and add to plays, actually play and
Yeah,
not like be inactive. And I feel like Tez Walker, Keaton Mitchell, those guys can be a big part of that. Maybe like Jonte Wester. We didn't really get to see a lot of him on the receiving tip, but hopefully we can, in 2026.
yeah,
I want to see that. I want to see what he has to offer. But that's really just what I had. Just a very nice press conference. It was good to see Bashadi, for the first time, for me personally, the first time in a while. Good to see how honest he is and how, locked in he is of watching the games. He's a real Ravens fan and not just, one of those owners who are kind of like out of touch. He was real Ravens fan. So you got any last things?
yeah. John Angelos, or Peter Angelos. Like he I'm glad he stepped in when he needed to step in. This is when he needed to step in. And he did, and he did the right thing. And I'm glad that he didn't, you know, not trust his gut. I really thought that there wasn't going to be any change. Like, there was no reason for me to believe that there's going to be change. I mean, they just extended Harbaugh to a 3-year contract. Like, there was no reason to believe it. And look, I fully believe that him and EDC are buddy buddy up there, but like if I'm him, I'll be buddy buddy with him over in front of the cameras. But as soon as they turn them bitches off, like you better get your ass on the phone and get some guys in here, or you better be scouting your ass off this year because that's another thing. This draft, if EDC wants to keep all his damn picks, you better hit this year. Like no, goofy picks, quarterbacks, punters, fullbacks, water boys or whatever. Like hit your fucking picks this year. Like you don't want to use this draft capital and get established players, and your scouting department this year better have been scouting their ass off. You better be evaluating your ass off, and you better draft your ass off.
When the pressure is on, he has to hit. It can't be no misses because last year had a ton of misses. There has to be hits and there has to be, good, progress in free agency. At least one or two good signings, especially with the guards. If it's not in free agency, it has to be through the draft, So we look forward to that. This offseason with EDC, definitely, a lot of room for improvement, a lot of room for growth, and with this new head coaching staff. But that's just a quick recap. The press conference today, Steve Bisciotti, Eric DeCosta, as we search for our new, head coaching, staff. That's what we got for you guys today. Make sure you comment down below. What were your thoughts about the press conference? What were your thoughts about Bisciotti or EDC's comments? Were you guys disappointed in EDC, like Jarrett were, or where there's something you can hold your head high on with what he said? Let us know down below. Check out our social medias, our Instagram, our TikTok, and our Twitter. And also check out our second channel, Casual Cinema. We'll have something on there soon. We're Bird Spray Sports, and we're up.
Right.